Everybody said, Amen. Amen. Go ahead and have a seat. So when was the last time that you used the word epiphany in a sentence? When was the last time that you weaved that into a conversation at a party? It might be a little more common than you think. Some people like to use that word. I think it's a beautiful word. This idea of a realization, of a deep awakening. We have these moments all of the time, actually, when you think about it. Like, have you ever had that experience where you're just driving and all of a sudden you start thinking of someone who you haven't thought of for a long time? Maybe you even call them and it's like, I was just thinking about you. And I just wanted to call and check in. You just came to mind. As human beings, we have this experience in our consciousness, which is very strange. It's that thoughts come out of nowhere. We don't really know where they come from. Even scientists today who study this stuff all the time, they're like, it's still really hard to explain where thoughts and ideas actually originate from in human experience. Why we sit there and all of a sudden you'll be sitting here today and you're like, milk, I need to get milk. It just came out of nowhere. All of a sudden it came to mind in the midst of something completely different. We have that. Maybe some of you have the opposite experience, where you walk into a room and you're like, why did I come in here? I came in here for something, and now I don't remember what it is. That would be the opposite of it. That is something leaving your consciousness and leaving your mind, and you can't explain why that happens. Other than some of you tell me, you're like, John, you're only 41. That shouldn't be happening to you. Just wait. So an epiphany is like one level deeper than that, maybe two, where you have these deep realizations, where something within you kind of expands, where you see something differently than you ever did before, where you have this experience where you see something or there's like a different, sometimes someone says it a different way. You've heard it many times, but someone says it a different way and you're like, it unlocks something in your mind. I've been thinking about that for a long time, and now I kind of get it in a different way. So the church kind of recognizes this, and every year we come to this season of Epiphany where we read these stories about Jesus. For people who have been in church for a long time, they're very familiar stories, but there's just something about it. When you open up the Bible, you open up Scripture, and sometimes it's just a different phrase, it's a different angle. And all of those things are the experience of Epiphany. So for the next 3 weeks, we are doing the story of the wise men, or the Magi, is a standby for Epiphany, the baptism of Jesus, and then the wedding at Cana, where Jesus turns water into wine. All of these things have something in common. Very ordinary. Natural things are happening. Physical things from the world become something very extraordinary. Okay? So with that, we are going to be in Matthew chapter 2, which is where the story of the Magi, or the wise men, comes from. Matthew chapter 2. If you're new to the Bible, the book of Matthew is the first gospel, and it's, 3/4, 4/5, 5/6 of the way through through the Bible. So Matthew chapter 2, we'll start at verse 1. Friends, I invite you to stand for the reading of Scripture today. The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of the Lord stands forever. So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him." And when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. And when he had called together all the chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "Well, in Bethlehem of Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet had written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." So then Herod called the Magi secretly, and he found out from them the exact time the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." And after they heard the king, they went on their way. And the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. And on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. And they opened their gifts, their treasures, and presented him with the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Go ahead and have a seat. So, we don't have a ton of time, so I try and have the service end in about an hour, but because of the things going on, we'll probably go to an hour 5, hour 10. I believe in you. I think you can do it. So, first slide, let's get a picture of Herod. So this is King Herod. I always like to say what things are a matter of faith and what things are a matter of history. So King Herod is a historical figure. Even people who would consider themselves atheists know that Herod was a historical figure. He lived in the 1st century. What's interesting is if you know anything about Judaism, that if you are going to be the king in Israel, there's a really important requirement. You had to be in the line of who? David. You had to be in the line of King David. So anyone who was king in Israel needed to be in the line of King David. Interestingly, Herod was not. Herod wasn't even Jewish. Herod married into a Jewish family. He was from a neighboring country called Edom, which was actually a historic rival and had multiple wars with Israel in the Old Testament. But he married into a prominent Jewish family at a time of complete chaos, where people were fighting for control over Jerusalem. And he and his family had a lot of money, and he was raising up his own army. And he got an endorsement from Caesar Augustus, who we would know also as Octavian, for those of you who read Julius Caesar in high school. So he had the endorsement and the support of Caesar Augustus and took the throne in the midst of chaos, where multiple people were trying to get the throne. And I'm sure Caesar Augustus was like, aren't you supposed to be Jewish? And Herod's like, don't worry about it. I've got it. I will figure it out. And so Herod was the king of Israel at the time when Caesar Augustus was the emperor of the world. That's kind of how Caesar ruled. He had multiple kings throughout the world that kind of answered to him and were kind of these like puppet leaders in the different countries that they were in. And so the Jewish people couldn't stand Herod. He tried to win their support by rebuilding the temple and making it the biggest and most powerful worship facility in the world, but people didn't really buy it. They didn't have allegiance to him. He was incredibly brutal, often executing multiple people who stood in his way, just this kind of power-hungry narcissist. What's interesting is that the Magi, so as we walk through the story, okay, so it says after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea in the time of King Herod, so there's the King Herod. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. All kinds of mystery around these guys, right, who these people were. So some people think that they were astrologers, and that's how they saw the star. Some people think they were advisors to a foreign king. We don't really know for sure who they were. What people are pretty sure about is that these guys were deeply connected. They were really important. The reason why they know that is because they easily get a meeting with King Herod. And not anyone can just walk into the palace in Israel and have a conversation with a crazy person, right? But they did. They walked right in, and so apparently they were known well enough or had enough authority that they were invited into the palace to have a meeting with King Herod. And so it says, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. So most people think they were like maybe ambassadors or foreign diplomats of some kind, or advisors to the king in which they were from. Where is the one who is born King of the Jews? Which is a really gutsy question to ask the King of the Jews, right? So they're the ones saying like, hey, where's the one born King of the Jews? Because from what we understand, you're not really it. This is why Herod's disturbed. He's like, what did you just say? And if there is a true king who's born King of the Jews, that's a threat to him, right? That's a major threat to him. So where's the one born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him. not just pay homage, not set up a treaty system, not shake hands and go to some banquets and establish means of communication and good feelings between countries. No, we've come to worship this guy because we know deep down that there's something more going on. We don't have all the answers. We can't explain everything. But we know deep down there's something more. They had an epiphany, and it's only growing. So when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him, because when Herod's disturbed, everybody's disturbed. It gets really messy really fast. And so when he called together all the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. Now, you got to get the subtlety of the Bible. That's actually a jab at Herod. Matthew's being playful and funny because anybody who grew up knowing the Torah, anybody who grew up knowing the scriptures, basically anybody who was Jewish, knew where the Messiah was supposed to be born. It was like something people just knew. But Herod doesn't know because Herod's not Jewish. He doesn't get this stuff. He doesn't care. He doesn't actually care about it. So he's like, so where's the Messiah supposed to be born? And they all replied, just so you know, you should probably know this, But you in Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. Here we'll quote the Bible for you. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So then Herod does what Herod does. Let's set up a back channel conversation. Let's kind of use this as an opportunity. And so he calls the Magi aside. And the Magi are used to this kind of stuff, right? They're used to people in power. They go in palaces. They go to banquets. They have security details. Like, they're not thrown by Herod. They work with people like Herod all the time. So Herod calls them into a secret meeting, which is what you do when you try to control with power. So you limit communication, just bring them in, secret meeting. Calls the Magi secretly, found out the exact time the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, hey, go and search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I may too go and worship him. And the Magi are like, I don't like the way you looked at me when you said that. Did you notice how he kind of looked? Yeah, I noticed too. All right. I don't like this guy. And so I don't think they bought it. So there's this whole drama and backstory. Go and search for him carefully. And after they heard the king, they went on their way. And the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And what I love about this part is that if you know anything about Bethlehem, Bethlehem is not a prominent town. It's kind of run down. It's seen better days. One of my friends loves to say Bethlehem is like that town that you drive into and it has a sign as you drive in and it says like Bethlehem, state champs, Class B football, 1994. You're like, 1994? That was like a lot. That's like the biggest thing that's ever happened here. And in the Midwest, towns are filled with these signs, right? I'm from Michigan. We had one in our hometown the last time we won a state, and that's like the only thing that's ever happened. And Bethlehem was kind of like that. And I just love that here come these Magi who wander in. It would be like the security detail and like the ambassador from France, rolling into some small town in New Jersey. Pick one. And almost like when they roll in, everyone's like, what is going on around here? No one important has visited this place in a really long time. And I wonder how the Magi felt. That's why they went to the palace first, right? That's where kings are born. And instead they end up in this kind of run-down old town. They're like, what restaurants are even around here? Where can we even eat? And they walk in, and they're like, I guess this was a lot different than I thought it was going to be. I thought when, the King of the Jews was born, I thought when God himself was going to be born into the world, right? That's why they've gone to worship. I thought when God was going to be born in the world, there'd be some more fanfare, be a bigger deal. But part of the epiphany that they're just starting to realize is that God actually shows up in our ordinary experience. God shows up in the conversations that we have. God shows up in the people who visit in the hospital. God shows up in the cards that we receive. God shows up in the sandwiches that we make for people in Newark. God shows up in our ordinary experience. We keep looking far out, but we should just be looking around. And here they are in Bethlehem. I'm like, okay, not what I was expecting, not how I would have entered the world if I were God, but here we go. All right, so let's go to the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. And on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and I love this. And they bowed down and worshiped him. These guys who probably never bow a knee to anybody, these important people. And they walk in, and they see this child born in poverty, right? We talked about this on Christmas Eve, that Mary and Joseph were probably very poor, everyday Jewish people. And they see Jesus with his mother Mary, and somehow they knew. They had an epiphany. A light came on that wasn't on before. And they were like, oh, I get it. I get it. God's come back for all of us. Every single one of us. And he's come back in our normal, everyday experience. Of course. Of course this is how God would show up. Now, I'm going to give what I call a Pastor John interpretation here for a minute, because I wonder how they felt being very important people, right? They are always in the VIP section. And I wonder how they felt when they rolled in and they're like, okay, God's showing up to Mary and Joseph, and here's this baby being born in Bethlehem. Okay, I can get with that. So, question for you. Are we the first? Are we the first ones? We're the VIPs, right? We're the ambassadors. We are the connected people. We're the first, right? Who get to see him. That's pretty cool. We brought our gold. We got our frankincense and myrrh. We're first, right? And I wonder if Mary and Joseph were like, hate to break it to you, the shepherds. The shepherds were first. And I wonder if the Magi were like, oh, usually not second. And I'm usually not second to shepherds. When I stand in line for communion, I thought I was going to be first. But as it turns out, there's no order to communion. It's just everybody. Everybody can come down. There's no first pew, second pew. There's no cheap seats. It's just everybody. It's like the opposite of going to a Yankees or Mets game, right? Where you see the important people. You wonder, what job did they have to get that seat, I wonder. It just doesn't work like that. This completely flips their world upside down. And I wonder, I'd love to talk about this for a while, but I wonder if the Magi had that experience of like, you know how you kind of have it sometimes where you thought you'd be one of the first to know, and you're not? You kind of find out later, like when everybody else finds out. You kind of have this experience of like, oh, I've been working here a long time. I thought you'd want to like ask me what I thought about this new decision at work. And we have that feeling, right, of like, oh, I thought I'd know. And it makes you kind of settle in, and it humbles you a little bit. You start with anger and like feeling jilted, but what you should really be feeling is the humility within that. Of like, oh, okay, I didn't know. And they weren't first. And I love that about the Christmas story, is that the Magi weren't first. The shepherds were first. The everyday people, the poor people, they were the ones who got to see Jesus first. And so the Magi, part of their epiphany is that they have to reorient their entire lives. They have to reorient who they thought was important. They have to realize that actually everybody's important. You have these jobs, but they're just jobs. It doesn't change the dignity or the value of you as a person. Anyway, okay. So then they opened their gifts and their treasures. And the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So gold is the gift for a king, right? That's what you bring royalty. Frankincense is the incense that they used in the temple. So they bring that for worship. And myrrh they use for embalming, for burial. Interesting. So if they understand that he's the king, they understand that he's meant to be worshipped. That's why they fall down and worship him. But the third gift, almost like the third day. It's for his burial. It's like they realize there's something different about this story. I feel like this king, instead of going to a palace, he's going to end up in a garbage dump that they call Golgotha. That instead of a throne, he's going to end up on a cross. And instead of a crown made of gold and silver, he's going to get one made of thorns. Even though they don't fully get it, they can't answer all the questions yet, they have a feeling of where this story is going to go. And it just came out of the natural experience. Here's the last thing that I love about the story. What do they get? You know, these guys are used to this transaction, right? We bring you this, and now we set up some trade, we get this thing going, we got you this. Well, what do we get? You know what they get? Him. They get Jesus himself. They get his forgiveness. They get his grace. They get his life. What they also don't realize yet is that they didn't even need to bring the gifts. They didn't need to bring anything. The only thing they needed really was open hands and an open heart. And that's how they receive it. Out of something normal, it becomes extraordinary. Very similar to communion. Bread, something normal, something from our everyday experience.